I'll start with a photo where some of you may guess which city this can be. If you look a long time, you will understand that this is Cologne Cathedral. But if you look more detailed, it has no roof anymore. And also the bridge which is going to this building is bombed. The whole city at last, Cologne, is bombed away. This is a photo from 1945 where we see what the destruction of the 20th century could do. So we go now to a very ugly century, and we will have a look what this changed in the thinking of monumental preservation. I give here a very early example of the destruction. This is an example from the First World War, and we just see here the surrounding of Verdun, where one of the most bloody or the bloodiest battle of the First World War was fought. And when we see such cannons and such small human beings, then we have an understanding what full of power was working now against the soldiers, against the building, against everything. In Germany, after the First World War was lost, they get a completely new system. The aristocracy and the emperor had to leave. They have to give away their seats. And what followed was a revolution between communists and right-wing people. And they found a way to come together. The way they found was take a democracy. And in the democracy, these powers were still fighting each other. This was a kind of compromise. The democracy which was developed at that moment, take the German country, a lot of areas, these areas were given away, were lost, but the countries which were earlier in this area were still existing. That means we have the big part which is blue, Prussia, we have here Bavaria, and so on. This is our small Anhalt where Dessau and Bernburg and Köln are laid. So these countries were still existing, and these countries in Germany had the right to speak about the culture. They had also the right for the monumental protection. So they were in duty to give law. And all these small countries, the big one, Prussia, and the smaller one, did it, give themselves a law. But at last it was the tradition of the emperor's time, which was not really changed. There was not just a big movement to do something for monuments, because at last this republic was very poor. They had not the ability to do huge steps, especially not for monuments. Mostly they were simply working to have food and have something to eat. So that we have not a big changing during that time. In the United States, at the same time, an artist tried to make a kind of agreement between countries, like to encourage people to do something for the peace. This is this man, Nicholas Broderick. He was a very interesting painter. He also painted a lot of paintings from Asia. So he was a person who was visiting Tibet and so on. So he was someone who was very open-minded for the world. It was not a man just live in a village and know nothing about the surrounding. And this Broderick persuaded at last the President Roosevelt, here we see him, by signing the so-called Broderick Act. And this was something where they tried, like the Hague Convention, which we had earlier, bring at last countries together to have an agreement how they handle their culture. This should be one step more, but at last only 11 states accepted it, so it was not that big push what the artist hoped. But I like this example because this example at last shows that monumental protection can also be done by single persons who are encouraged. And that was the motive of Roderick. He simply loved this cultural stuff and he was fighting for it. And it's very beautiful that such people are able to move presidents, that they are willing to sign such contracts. So that, I think, is something encourage people to work for monuments. In Germany, 1933, the lights were shut off, the lights of culture were shut off. The National Socialism take power. In the time of National Socialism, we can think about the model, what they had in their brain. The model surely was they like to play with the history because they thought that they are part of the German history and they are at last the crown of that what was developed over thousands of years. They thought that the highest peak of the history is their philosophy. And by this thinking, they take the monuments, of course, important, and they changed something in the view of monuments. Because what they really changed at last was the scientific way to look on that. We see here the people who were responsible for monuments, and this man showed in his gesture already what for a brain is behind of this person. But he was changed against Alexander von Müller, who take a longer time responsibility. And here we see some books which are always taking the peoples in front. That is very important for these leaders. The architecture of the Third Reich is very often discussed in a, I would even say, too easy way, because there is not the idea of these huge monuments as the single idea of the Hitler system. The Hitler system was in reality not that what it seems to be. When we think about that time, we think about marching armies. The armies are moving as one person. We think it's a state which was completely ordered, everything under control. There was everything under control, but behind of it was a huge chaos. And this huge chaos was also in the architecture. We have the example of Albert Speer, who designed Berlin in a size a little bit too much for a city. We have projects like this one, Hofer, which was at the Baltic Sea for the workers to go there for vacation. A very interesting social concept, give the workers place for vacation. That was something what was in reality also a very big step to take care of workers. But the architecture is horrible. It's hundreds of meters long and always has these small yards where dozens, thousands of workers were at last brought to enjoy their vacation under the political ideas. The other point is that we have some iconical architecture. This is also a very stupid way to do it, because you see the shadows already. When you build such an architecture, there are always some corners. If you think from the northern side, there are always some corners where it's at last never sunshine. So this is a very stupid way to do a design, but also such iconical architecture projects were done. And we have one very important direction in the Third Reich, which we can call like home style. This is what we see here. There are small houses which are arranged like a village. We think most of the people remember the Volkswagen, what means translated people's car. This huge company, I think today is the biggest producer in motor cars. This company was also founded in the Third Reich. It was founded under the idea, even the names say that everyone should have the chance to have a car. And like this idea to give everyone a car, the system also had the idea to give all the people a housing. And this is one of these projects which is done in such a home style, with roofs and very lovely suite, which also belong to this kind of architecture. So when we see this picture, we can see already the system was not really clean in the ideas. Under it was a chaos which had very different faces. One project is interesting to be mentioned. This is a project of the most horrible people maybe ever lived. We have here mass murders together in a size where normal people cannot imagine. This is Heinrich Himmler, here is Heydrich, a lot of this SS people, the most ugly organization which has last taken the responsibility to kill so many people in the concentration camps. Here they are sitting together and they are sitting under a picture. This is this picture which shows a castle. It shows the castle of Wewelsburg. This is this castle. This is what is drawn here. And this Wewelsburg is a little bit special. It was a medieval castle which has a very strange form. It had a triangle. And Himmler chose this castle to make it like a castle of the SS organization, like their secret place where these people met. And then they abused history in the typical way how Nazi system abused history. They changed the architecture inside, outside. I begin inside and take such a holy room in the middle of it. This was a decoration for this secret organization. They feel like German knights, they feel like holy people fighting for a holy idea. And this needs a special room. So they make the central room here, change the Medieval architecture completely and make this kind of Medieval architecture inside. But the idea was even more genius. In their unbelievable no-size thinking, they thought they can change the whole villages around of it. Here is the castle and all the villages should be organized new. We see how lovely and out of order these villages were. They had the idea also to organize the surrounding. This of course shows one manner of this system, the strict idea to organize things. But we heard it in a chaotic way and very different what was done. Even in this time we have more examples. Here is a very important one in Quedlinburg, which is also in Saxony-Anhalt, a very beautiful city. And this city has one thing what is very special. Before Germany had the first German emperor, Otto the Great, they had a very important politician, and this important politician was his father. At last his father prepared that his son could be emperor. This man was in the rank of the king. His name in German is Heinrich the First, in English Henry, and this man is the father of the first emperor, and he's very important because he stabilized in the 10th century Germany after it was completely gone. The Hungarians were attacking it, Vikings were attacking it, so the structure of the state was lost, and he was able to stop the Hungarians, and he was coming, or his home center was this Quedlinburg. And when he died, he was buried in this cathedral, and the body was just put it under the earth, and then the Nazi system thought that they can excavate it and find out where this Henri is. But they found nothing. They suggest something and put some bones together and thought, now this is the king, the father of the first emperor. And the interesting thing was that the name Heinrich was the same as Himmler, who also had the first name Heinrich. And because of this, he thought he has a special relationship to this king. And then this madman began to change the whole architecture to make this basement, the crypt of this church, like a secret place or holy place for the memory of the Heinrich, and at last also a place for the SS. And so even this important monument, which is really a very important church, it's a church from the Romantic time, and as we understand the roots are in the 10th century, this even was not holy enough for them that they didn't touch it. They changed history even in this room to make their own history, what at last was a completely lie. Even in this time, and this is something what really impressed me, were people like Georg Lill, who write articles against that. He was very brave. He showed that this is the wrong way. He did it, of course, in a book, it's a yearly book for the Christian art, 1939, the year where the war began. So he was really brave enough to show that this kind of taking care of monuments is wrong. So also at this time there were people who were brave enough to think about the protection. Then the Second World War started, and in Germany this gentleman was responsible, Franz Graf Wolf Metternich. He at last had the duty to explain, doesn't matter, it's not that worse, we can make that up, and that's at last what he did. We see here the bombing of Coventry, which is always mentioned as the first huge attack of the German Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, which was bombing down British cities. And of course, after that, the bombing between of the countries was starting. How can you explain that when you think about monumental preservation, when you think about monument protection, beside of the people, the civilians, which are killed by such an attack. This has nothing to do with the Hague Convention. It's far away from that, and this is what was done over that time. And here we have one very interesting case. It's an important case because it has to do with someone who really could use words. This is Winston Churchill. And Winston Churchill, who was the Prime Minister of Britain during the Second World War, he was someone who even got the Nobel Prize. But the interesting thing is, nowadays politicians like to put in each other's pocket the Nobel Prize of Peace. This was at that time, seems not that easy for politicians. He didn't get the Nobel Prize for Peace. I think also it wouldn't fit him so much. No, he got the Nobel Prize for Literature. So he was someone who really was able to set up words. And this was his great ability. And we will now examine one case, and we will think or discuss if this was correct, if we saw that in the correct way. The topic, what we discuss, is the House of Commons. The House of Commons, which was bombed by a German attack by the German Air Force, was completely damaged. We see it here, how it was looking after the bombing. The original story of this building is a different one. In Britain, we have two chambers. We have the High Court and we have the People's Parliament. And the House of Commons at last was the People's Parliament. And this parliament, which is shown here in an elder picture, was the place where they at last settled up their empire. So it's a place where all the decisions were done. For example, in the Opium War, 1840, they decided to go to war in this parliament. This was a very important place for the whole history of Britain. Here we see this room round about 1910. You can see this room was a little bit changed. We see the pillows here. This is still this one. But we also see a new kind of decoration which was done over the time. In any way, this beautiful room was damaged by the German Air Force and completely destroyed. Now we have the speech from Winston Churchill, which was given on the 28th of October 1944. He took a very important sentence. The sentence is a sentence which is a sentence which should encourage architects, because he said, after he described the situation, that first we shape the buildings, and afterwards the buildings shaped us. Now let's think about it. What's the meaning? I always think when I step in very beautiful rooms, for example, imagine a church building or a temple which is very beautiful, highly decorated, or in a very noble way built, and you enter this building. When you are there, you feel the atmosphere, and you will have problem to speak an ugly word if you are angry, because the whole architecture forbids you to speak ugly. I also think about the streets constructions. There are tunnels under the street. When these tunnels are done roughly in concrete, cold, people don't accept that. And the result is everywhere in the corners they pee. If you have the same in a different way, people will not do it. If the architecture is noble, the architecture at last helps you to behave different. And that was his idea. His idea was that architecture changes people's behavior. And he explained it like that. When he was a young man, he went to this building. And this building gave him a way to handle things. The building encouraged him to work in a special way. And because this building is so important, he thought, for training people to be working in a good way, he thought we have to rebuild it in the same way as it was before. And Britain did it. Nowadays, when they decide the Brexit or whatever they do, they are still sitting in a room which looks like the room which was before the Second World War there. But is this correct? Now I can speak a very continental European opinion. I would think if they would not have done this, if they would have changed to a different architecture, maybe they would have understood that their empire was gone. After the Second World War, all the countries which belonged to the British Empire, at last, nearly all the countries get independent. A lot of them even didn't accept the Queen or King as the head of their country. They really get independent. The influence of Britain was slowed down rapidly. At last, England was a country, or Britain was a country like several other European countries. One of them, not the super nation, which controlled one time nearly half of the world. They didn't understand it. And maybe because they still have the building, still have the thinking, they could decide 2008 the Brexit and leave the European community. Maybe such rules teach people even wrong to continue Winston Churchill's thinking. As a European, I think it was a wrong decision. They should stay in Europe and change Europe with their manner, with their way. That would be helpful. But the architecture, which is a 19th century architecture, keeps people in 19th century thinking. Churchill didn't understand. He was entering a new time because he fought the Second World War to keep the circumstances as before. But this idea was completely failed. Now we look for Germany. Surely not a better philosopher, a very angry, aggressive person, Joseph Goebbels. And this man also speaks something about the architecture. He was responsible for propaganda, and I think he's well known with the very famous speech, "Wollt ihr den totalen Krieg?" Do you like the total war? So this is surely one of the most important speeches was given in the Third Reich, and he did it. And this man spoke about all this ruined city, which were looking like that. Na ja, so what? Doesn't matter. These cities were ugly. We couldn't use them with a car. They were not modern. The life circumstances were not beautiful. It's okay they are bombed away. We need modern cities where cars can go rapidly. We maybe need 2 or 3 of these old medieval cities, but wipe them out, and so what? We build new cities. That was the thinking. Is also an idea. During the time of this Third Reich, there were also some documents prepared which have a relevance for monumental heritage. This here is a group of modern architects. It's not a group of people who come from art history. These people mostly come from architecture. We see Le Corbusier, Walter Gropius, Gideon, Rudolf Steiner, Werner Moser, Cornelius von Easton. They were meeting each other to discuss modern architecture, to discuss such ideas. Here we see such a meeting. Between 1928 and 1936, they were discussing how to change the cities in a modern way. And by this, they ratified the Charter of Athens. It was publicated later. We see that Corbusier published it in 1943. So the publication, that means also the effects on society, started later. And now the idea, what did they think about monuments, these modern architects? What was their idea? The first is that buildings which are protected, the background should be knowledge. And you also should think critical if you really need it or you don't need it. It's a serious decision if you decide this monument needs to be protected. They also understand that this can only be under national legalization. It's not possible to give this to a world parliament because the law is done in the countries. Even thieves, murderers are hunted in their own country. It's very difficult to do this on an international way. And how you like to do this protecting buildings on an international way. So I think it's logical that this only can be done by nations. Only nations, countries can decide their law. The next point is that they thought when we have excavations, the excavations should not be restored. This is something what was different as in the Third Reich. When in Germany they found something old, they need to build it back to give the old feeling. They thought this is wrong. Excavation should not be restored. They should simply maybe cover it, but don't try to restore something to show that in a way as you think it was. The next is that they are not against it to use modern techniques to protect old buildings. Of course, there were architects who were working with modern material and they believed in the modern material. So for them, it was no problem to do it in this way. The other point is also very clear. It should be under a custodial protection. That means they were asking for experts. Experts who take care of this kind of law, who take care of the buildings. And they also fix already that the surrounding of the monument is also important. It's not only the monument, also the buildings around of it have to respect that. Basic ideas is that there is a world heritage, a responsibility of mankind. This is new. This is very important. It's a gift of mankind. Have the pyramids of Egypt, have the pyramids in China, have the pyramids in Middle America. It's a gift for the mankind. It does not belong to a nation. This is a new idea, a very important idea. They think that the monument should be in a list that should give something. It's like security. You have a monument, you have no monument, and if it is in a list, worldwide we have to take care of them. The integration of new material we discussed already, and that this needs special institutions with knowledge is one of the points what we had earlier. The next topic was that they like these buildings are protected, which are important for the cultural heritage, are protected from demolition. They should be not touched. Then the restoration, the retention is in public interest. Okay, listen. I have to start new. After so much destruction, we should look how to rebuild things, how to make things better. In Germany, this is a very creative thing, because the people who built our cities after the Second World War, we saw how horrible they were damaged, were the architects which improved their knowledge in the Third Reich. We have in most of the cities that they take the old structures. Very less cities take the chance to have a new urban design. This has to do with property. Property is normally in private hands. That means there is a yard which belongs to someone. And when I now like to do a new urban design, completely new streets, whatever, I have to arrange the whole property in a new way. This is always against the people who have this earth for several hundred years. Families can have this for a long, long time, and suddenly I take it away. The next is, when the house is demolished, the basement can be still there. Some walls can be still there. They can be reused. So for this, it was very seldom that they really changed cities completely. In West Germany, we have especially Düren, which was changed, and Hanover. Hanover is the most famous example. In East Germany, we have some smaller corrections, also in Dessau. The huge design from Hanover was done by Rudolf Hildebrecht. This man and the other one, Hans Stoßberg, were high Nazi leaders. He was second rank behind Albert Speer, the first architect of Hitler. This one, even I didn't find a picture from him in the internet, because I think his relatives don't like it so much, because he was also responsible to build the Auschwitz concentration camp. And such people built the German cities after the Second World War. These people did exactly what the idea was of Hitler in the Third Reich. They exactly did what was the idea of Joseph Goebbels, what we saw before. Because they built the cities which respect the car. Cars could go very smoothly through the cities. You could jump in your car, go shopping. Everything was nice for the car. And at last, by this kind of design, they built more and more cities which were very suitable for cars. But at last, not for human beings anymore. Here we see one example of a very important house which was in a public discussion. For the German culture, everything is Goethe. Germans always need their Goethe. And even the Cultural Institute, which is abroad in a lot of countries, the Goethe Institute takes the name of this important poet. But at last he also was a scientist. And the house of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe was this one in earlier time. Here he was born. And this beautiful house was changed several times, but at last this was the form what was remembered. In the Second World War it was damaged, and now the city of Frankfurt like to rebuild it. Art historians begin to discuss, and this man take a very interesting statement, Walter Dirks. Walter Dirks take the statement, think about it. Goethe, who lived 1800, roundabout, was for the national identity of Germany so important. And from this national identity, also the Nazi system take part of it. They used Goethe for their idea. Was not Goethe a beginning, at last, in some parts, to have the Nazi system? Can we rebuild this house, or is it better to do a new one, because we don't like to connect to this kind of history? Very serious question. When we rebuild something, of course, we do it for memory. And here was no memory anymore, the house was gone. And now we rebuild something new, or build something new for memory. But what is it? We don't show the destruction. We don't show the result of that, what happened because of the Nazi system, the destruction of the city. We hide this destruction as if this never happened, and play. We are still in the 19th century, where our great Goethe was such an important poet, accepted everywhere, and we continue the story as if this never happened. And this is surely a serious problem. What he discussed. The city of Frankfurt didn't hear on him. Of course, they rebuilt it, and today you can visit Goethe's birthhouse again, and it looks like that. The same discussion was also done in the German Democratic Republic, in the DDR. We see here an art historian, Eberhard Hempel, who discuss how to handle the ladies' church in Dresden, German Frauenkirche. This design, which was done by Georg Beer in the middle of the, or a little bit earlier in the 18th century, was destroyed completely and looked like that. And he thought, don't touch it. Let this building look like the ruin. Let the people see what happened. Let the people see the result of Second World War. They should remember that. When I went there, first time, that was in the 90s, beginning of the 90s, there were still some flowers. People bring flowers to the ruin. Till today, no one knows how many people were killed during the bombing of Dresden, but there were still people who remember someone, and they remember the bombing. And this was a monument for the people who lost someone. Then the government changed, especially the Chancellor, Helmut Kohl, the Chancellor of the Reunion. He had the idea to rebuild it. And he was able to raise a lot of money. He even later lost a little bit his position because he was too good in raising money. They raised enough money and rebuilt it. And nowadays we can see it in this way. But we have to ask, was Hempel wrong? Because now we have this church back. It's not done that stupid. Because when you look on the picture, or you look, surely it's too small, but in reality you will find that there are black stones inside. And these black stones are still from the original one. And by this you can read today, here are some black stones, what is original and what is damaged. So by this it's a little bit to see what happened, but not really. This is a very strange situation and something we have to think about it. Now we go to Poland. Warsaw was completely destroyed. First, the German army stepped in, fight with the people who were fighting for independence. Then the Soviets went in. The city looks like that, but they decided to reconstruct it, to have back their old Warsaw. And then they built it in this way. The point is that also in other projects, for example Danzig, you can see that this is in reality architecture from 1950. They put this historical stuff inside, but at last you see the time. You cannot do a reconstruction like people 200 years ago. You always have your ideas, your way to handle things, and experts will always discover that this is not true, that this is something what is in reality elder. The Hague Convention, we had this important paper already, which gives statements about war, was renewed after the Second World War. There was a new paper in 1954 and another reform 1999. And in these reforms, it was always the topic beside of all the maybe much more important things what have to do with humanity. How to treat the civilians, how to treat children, women, how to treat prisoners of war and so on. There are also parts inside which have to do with culture. And here we have the topics which are important for culture. We have the architecture, the art or the history, monuments about that. We have the archaeological sites, we have the artwork, and we have the manuscripts, the books, and other objects of artists. And we have, of course, the archaeological interests and the scientific collections. This is something what is in reality in other conventions already, but here repeated and another time fixed up. Now is a very long statement how it should be done. At last I can shorten it. The point is that when you like to protect this, all the stuff what we saw earlier, it is a question of education. That means the people must know about that. If the people who are under attack don't know about their cultural heritage, they even don't know what is important. When the people who attack have no cultural education, they surely will not take care. So it is something what you have to explain, what you have to give to the heart of the people. Then maybe it works. Then in the case of war, things are not completely destroyed. But the experience is that very often a war is something what likes to hurt people. That's why it's war. And then they specially do exactly opposite as what is in these papers. They exactly like to hurt the culture of the enemy. When I saw the war in the Balkan region, the first thing they like to damage and shoot down were the churches as places of the culture when they begin to conquer villages. No, the ugly thing is, in war, people exactly like to do that. But this, on the other hand, means that these papers are very important. And especially the Balkan War shows that some of these murders were even sued and went to prison after they were sentenced to punishment in Den Haag. This is something what makes hopeful. There is such a general justice and idea in the world, and sometimes people who are not agreeing that, who work against it, are caught. This is what makes a little bit hope. The hope comes at last as one result of the Second World War, because the United States fixed up one important point, what was for Roosevelt very important. That was that he bring a new institution. They had this after the First World War, but this was not really working. They want to have a new institution with more power, a kind of world parliament, which could regulate wars, that they are not done, that people find peaceful ways, peaceful solutions. There should be such an organization. And that was the idea why the UNESCO was founded. 1945, founded in London. But the idea at last was from Theodore Roosevelt. And this organization need a while to fix itself. But we have the ICROM as the cultural organization, 1956. So 11 years later, the culture was also taken important and get part of the thinking of this world organization. A little bit late, but it is of course maybe even up to the meaning, what I mentioned with the Hague Convention. In the center first, of course, are the human beings, and then the culture. This organization founded other like teams which were under them, national groups, and Germany also take a national group and founded ICROMOS in Germany. So there are always groups in the countries, and most of the countries nowadays have such groups which are working together with this organization. The next huge step was 1972. This was UNESCO International, which was working on the idea of world heritages. This at last brings the things which were done in the Charter of Athens, 1931, on the point. It shows that the monuments belong to mankind. They are not the monuments which only belong to one country. Monuments belong to mankind. That's the important idea. Far away from nationalism. Very great development which could change mankind's thinking. Now, have your coffee break. When we have a world organization like the UNESCO, we also need some people who give us ideas how we can handle our monuments. The world is not unique. So many different cultures, so many different histories. There was one meeting, a kernel meeting, which really gives new ideas, or I would not say new ideas, which fixed the ideas, which were everywhere around already. And this paper, which fixed so brilliant the ideas, how to handle monuments, this paper was done in a very beautiful city, which nearly is crying for taking care of monuments. It was done in Venice. And in Venice, we see that in May, end of May 1964, some experts came together, most of them background ICROMOS, and these people were fixing the so-called Venice Charter. This is a basic paper, and every student should know that. You should read it by heart. I even think when you give this name in the internet, you will find it in your language. Because this paper is so basically important that it's nearly translated in all the languages of the world. But we go through, we will try to understand what this important paper say to us. We begin with the first article. This is a very important article, of course, and in Venice you will have this idea shortly. The first thing is that they are explaining that these things belong together. It's not only the single monument, it is also the surrounding. It is not the church, Maria del Orto, alone. It's also the neighbor building, which is not that important. But if this building is missing, the church is a different one. The same idea is for rural settings. That means on the countryside, it's different. A farmhouse, when we like to protect it, is single. Then we have to take care that it is still single. We should not build a skyscraper just in front of it. So the urban and rural settings, they belong to the monuments. We have to take that together. And the next shows the modest work of the past, which at last shows the significance of that. The second article is dealing with conservation and restoration. This is something very different. They don't speak about modernization. Modernization means bring everything out, keep a little bit old surface, that's it. They are only speaking about restoration. And they take conservation in the first rank. Because conservation, at last, is the most careful method. Conservation don't damage so much. Conservation is just taking the color and trying to make the color up. But it's not taking the color away, make new color. When we do restoration, the hurt, the damage is much deeper. We have to do more. But the most important one is standing in the beginning. Conservation, that's the first step. Restoration is the next step. Modernization is not even mentioned, should not be done. This is, at last, a very important proclamation. The next is that they think this should be based on studies. This should be based on scientific results, not what you just think, up to your feeling. You remember James White? Completely not. You should obey to the research. And after this results, you can do something. Here we show you some methods, what we also have here in our university. We show you the way to go by beams, by geographic beams, and understand what is under the earth for circumstances. Where is, for example, the old fundament? Or here a method how we analyze wood, how it was growing over the time. These are scientific methods, and such methods should be used. That means article number 2. Article number 3. A little bit what I mentioned already. The historical evidence is important, not what you suspect. You have to do this in a way when you restore a picture to find out how it was really, not what you just suspect it should be. You should do this in a scientific way to figure exactly these things out. This seems to be so logical, but it's very often not done. Take care of the main tent, that the candles, for example, are not filled up by grass leaves. You have to clean that up. If you don't do that, after a while the mortar is gone and the building is damaged. All the time you have to take care of a building. When you forgot to do it, the damage is very huge. It sounds logical, but if I think about especially the way how governments support buildings, it is even in the system that it's not done. When you are in an institution, it's very hard to fight for a permanent budget every year to take care of the buildings. It's easier, a building is damaged and you look for a huge budget and build it completely new. This is something where we really have to take care that we have in the budgets enough money to take care that the building is simply safe by the very simple things what at last don't cost so much money, but if it's hurt, costs unbelievable much. A very important thing is that we have to accept, when we like to protect monuments, that monuments need something how people can use them. If we think about a free land museum, this is possible 1 or 2 times. Take the example of farmhouses. People will go there and think, oh look, my ancestors lived like that. I can do that 2 or 3 times, give such circumstances as there were 300 years ago. But I can never ever protect all the important farmhouses with this concept. I need a concept where people can live in a farmhouse, where people can do something completely different today in a farmhouse, for example shopping. They need to do something what fits their time. And if people can use the building, when they can use the building, they will take care. And then the monument is safe. So to find a way how it can be used, even is different as it was built. This is the key point, to bring money to a monument, to take care that monuments are safe for the next generation. Here I give you the example of a palace building. Here before, important parties were done by the aristocracy. Nowadays, this is not in value anymore. People don't do such parties. And if you do it, you will bring too much humanity in the building, will be damaged. So here they use it for a concert. This is very easy and fits. This is a very interesting example which was done by a good friend of mine, Agnes Preitz. It's a church in Trier, and this church was not used anymore as a church. And they get the concept, or they developed the concept, to bring a sport hall and a concert hall inside. This is something that normally don't work. When you have a concert, you need the sound waves very long. When you have sport, you have to interrupt that. Because every step cannot go boop, 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 a long time through the room. That means the things, what this room must fulfill, are completely different in the concerts. And they found the trick with these curtains. When sport is done, these curtains go down, and that brings away this noise. So it's a very clever way to reuse the building in a new way without damaging it. You can see the architecture still, but surely you agree that this is interruption already. When people now, in Dutch it's very often done, do housings, apartments for living in churches, the church is nearly gone. You need different ways to bring light in. It's a concept that at last damaged the church. So how we use them is very important to fix the right way of protection. This is something what shows when I build new in front of old. The idea is that the setting should be always in the right scale. Here I take some funny pictures. Don't take it so serious. I even don't think it's a good solution. Because of this old building, maybe they make a beautiful round corner here. And here they show new and old, and this even fits. The young boy and the old lady, both are human beings. I think they fit, even they look so different. This is maybe the correct way to do it. In any way, we need the right size for new and old. This is what this paragraph mentioned. Transluxation is a technique where we move historical houses away. We had this topic in the Charter of Athens, 1931 already. There was written, when the motorway is coming, you remember this, then maybe the motorway or the railway is so important that we have to move a monument. And here in the Charter of Athens is written that this moval from monuments is wrong. Monuments have to stand on their place because they are part of the surrounding. When you like to remove them, you need a serious reason. For example, this railroad or something like that. When there's a serious reason, then it's okay, move the building to another place. Normally, it should not be done. The same is with artwork. I give here the example of Cologne Cathedral. These figures, here is a photo from the 19th century, which are standing in the Medieval gate. This gate is built in the 14th century, are very, very important. What an important artwork, 900 years old. And now the birds are coming, sit on the head of this figure and lose something. And this damaged the figures more and more. We tried very different ways. We tried to bring a sound inside, a very ugly sound, something like that, what human beings cannot hear, but doves can hear. And then the pigeons didn't go down anymore because they hate this noise. But it also didn't work. Some of them, seems to a dove, could not, had no understanding for this, and they still continue to damage the figures. At last, we moved these figures away, put them in a museum, and replaced them by new figures, which look like the old one. This is something what is normally not correct. Normally, this paragraph said, the old stuff, the art stuff, should belong to the building, should stay there, should not be moved away. What we did here is also the last option, if you have no other choice. But the first choice is, keep the figure on the old place. That's why we tried so much things to keep them there. Another example also from Cologne Cathedral. This shows that restoration, of course, is a highly specialized operation. It should be done in a very, very high quality. And when you change, now the figure is damaged, you should show, put what is standing here, the stamp of your time on it. And here we see some examples from 1960, how they translated that. They take this old figure and translated it in something else. This is today not done, because the cathedral master Arnold Wolf in Cologne decided he will reconstruct that. But even in a reconstruction, he fulfills this paragraph, because the stonemasons work in a different way on the stone. The stone is a different one. You still can identify that this is a reconstruction. This is a very complicated question. In reality, this doing, which was after 1964, is exactly what is meant. They thought it should be done like that. Problem was, when you continue to do that with a medieval building, at last it looks as something else. You lose the character of the house. That's why Arnold Wolf said, stop that, and we do as the medieval artists. Because he thought at that moment this figure is something what, in the case of war, documents are lost, photos are lost. And this is laying there. You can put it together, then you still can reconstruct it. It's a message from the medieval time. And I think he's right. So also these paragraphs, they are from 1964. We have to rethink them. We have to modernize them in some decisions. Here it's said that the first rank, when you do a restoration or a conservation, the first rank is a traditional technique. That's most safe. When you go ahead from that and you look for modern technique, it's always dangerous, because modern technique don't have the long history, don't have the long experience. Take concrete buildings. We know about concrete around about 150 years, but our building, our monuments are older. We have buildings which are 1,000 years old. Do we know what our concrete will do in 1,000 years? We don't know. Even with such a basic material, we don't know. When you use chemical material, you can have horrible experience. In Cologne Cathedral, I will give you some examples how the idea of modern material was very huge. You have a lot of sympathy for that. It sounds very logical, but at last, it was a disaster. Modern materials are not proof over a long time. Take care with modern material. But, on the other hand, it's allowed to use them. It's not forbidden. Here is an example which shows the value of different periods. We have a building in the roots from the Gothic. We have here some Gothic elements. Here we have an interruption of the late Gothic. Inside was Baroque. And here we have the reconstruction of this, which shows that this was done in the 2000 roundabout, so that you see the different periods of the time. And the paragraph here explains that this is important. You should not bring buildings back to an original idea. You should show the important parts of the history. It does not mean you need to show every nonsense, every small mistake, and keep a mistake. This is a very complicated decision. What is to keep and what's not to keep. This is not easy, because you have to decide to put something away and keep something. That makes the process of monumental preservation also very complicated. But important, we cannot make it so easy for us. Give one period and bring this back and everything is wrong. Exactly, this is wrong. But think about a building which is from the, like this one, from the Gothic. This is even elder. Is now the Baroque period not important? On the other hand, we protect Baroque buildings. We say, oh wow, this is a building from 1733. We need to protect it. And here we have a piece inside and we will say, we take it away, it's Gothic, it don't fit. No, every period is important. But to identify what is really important or was unnecessary small mistake, this makes the things more complicated. Here is something which continues the first idea of missing parts. And we have to do missing parts in a way that we understand that and that they are in harmony with the old building. We should not do a false reconstruction without historical evidence. I show you here one example of a church. This is before Second World War. This is after the changings after Second World War. You see that originally there was a way around of the choir. Here they closed it and used the rooms for something else. When we came to this place, they like to open this because they thought this atmosphere is better. We persuade them, instead of this, take these simple pictures and give them memory of that. This worked, they accepted it, and now this is still playing with this idea without being so roughly like this concept. Paragraph 14. Paragraph 14 explains the sites of the monuments have to be preserved. We heard already in the first chapter, or in the first article, that the urban and rural conditions of the area are under protection. Here they go one step further. You should present that also. You should show that this belongs together. And here we have one area which shows housing projects from the modernism, which is very typical. And you have to protect it, but you also have to show the common concept. Only when you show the common concept, people can understand it and will understand why it needs to be protected. The same article 15.1, or now 15.1, which deals with excavations. That this should be done under scientific standards should be normal. It's not like the first pyramids excavations in Egypt where they take dynamite, boom, to open them. This is of course not archaeology. Archaeology has to be done under scientific standards. And they have to show the results, the understanding of the monument. Here's one example of a church which shows the different periods, and also churches are changed it very often, and excavations can show that. The reconstruction is something what is not in the first rank, but this is a little bit repeating a paragraph we had already. Reconstruction is out of prayer. It's not the first rank. What we should do is bring the different periods together. The first example is what we heard, that we should show the different periods. But this is not enough. We have to bring that in a concept together. And this makes it very complicated. You have to find a new concept, that these different elements work together, if this is not given. I give one example of Chipperfield, of the new museum in Berlin, where this is done in a perfect way, where the other elements are combined with a new concept, and this concept brings all this different evidence of the history of this building together. That is what this article means. In Article 16, which is the last, we see that we should have documentations about that. Here we see one example. The tower here, the city tower, is restored, and there's a beautiful book and it shows what they did. This is not only for people who love their city and like to read something about the tower, how many witches were imprisoned and what for knights were fighting there. No, this has also another evidence. The evidence for this is that we have a documentation how this building looks before the restoration and how it looks later. What was changed during the restoration? What for a material we used? For example, we take a chemical material to protect the stones, and suddenly the stones get yellow. Then someone, 20 years later, need to know what for material we took. Maybe we are dead. We cannot tell. If we cannot have this information, how can they restore it? But when they find a booklet of ours where we write down how we did it, at that moment they can find the right chemical way to restore it, to bring this color away, change it, whatever. That means we need documentations to know exactly what was done before. And by this we make the continuing of the history of these buildings safer. That is the important idea of this article. Totally, this is the Charter of Athens. What I suggest, read it by heart, take it in a written way, and try to get very familiar with these points, because that is what you always need to discuss. All the law worldwide, the whole law in monumental protection, has this as a basic background. It's a little bit different and changed, but this paper went in most of the law, which I know worldwide. So by this, a very, very important chapter. And now, after so much articles, that's really something lawyers like more, architects, historians don't like that so much, but after so much articles, you earned your next coffee break. Now we had a very important paper, but the interesting question is, who was standing behind of this paper? Was there a World Parliament's decision? Who did this? This gentleman. This is a group which met. They met on a conference. Most of them have econ background, but they didn't have the duty to work this paper out. It was at last an idea which came from their private interest, from their love for these monuments. And by this, the group came together. A chairman was this one, and here we see the name, Gazzola. And this one, Han, he wrote down the articles. At last, they were the most important persons. When we look here for the background, they were from different countries, but in reality, not so many different countries. The countries out of Europe are mentioned here already. This is very less. At last, the committee was a very European one. But let's have a look. When we put the members on the map worldwide, we can see that the biggest group, 4 members, came from Italy itself. Venice, makes sense. The next group, 3 members, is France. And then we have a huge group which has 1 member. America, Union, Spain, and so on. It at last shows there was nearly no one from Africa, only from Tunisia. Australia was no one there. China, very important for monuments, no one involved. India, very important for monuments, no one involved. Here, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and so on, no one involved. The whole Soviet Union was not involved. The only country belonged to that here were the European countries in the West. So at last, it was in reality not a world conference, it was just a committee which met. The first one, the chairman, you see him, Piero Gazzola. He was a civil engineer from the background, but in his professional work, he worked a lot on the reconstruction of buildings, historical buildings, especially here this bridge, which was hardly damaged in the Second World War. And he was working on this topic, so he was burning for this topic. And he came together with Roberto Palmer, and they at last did this concept. They invade and they write the concept paper. This one is an art historian. Of course, the professor of the university, he need to write it. He wrote down the article. See that he did the work in reality. The background is he is a researcher in a lot of important cases. They invade another member, this one, who was a duty director in Ecom Rome. Rome not very far away. They want to have a paper which fans with Ecom, so they invade people from Ecom. Here we see another person who was involved in UNESCO. But the background is, of course, also art. He's an art historian. Here from Denmark. Scotland was also involved, member of ECROM. The United States sent this gentleman, who was also working in UNESCO and ECROM. The background here is that he also was working in the field of, you see that here, anthropology and archaeology. Another one, also a professor. Here's someone from Belgium. He also worked on the papers. And we see that he was doing a lot of research work about historical buildings. is even Jerusalem, so he was worldwide active. But of course, we see also Icon UNESCO. But later, that means the paper at last fits him for doing that. No. This lady was in charge. She was really responsible for monuments. She was a kind of director for the monuments in Austria, and she also joined it. She is a member, here we saw that, she was a member of this, and she's a female, I think the only woman which was in this club. This man, I always thought he was just working there. They asked him, invite him, hey, come on, we need someone from Mexico, we need a lot of different countries, join us. Because he was more or less a student at that time, and he was just doing restoration work. And on the way, they invite him, just join it. This gentleman who is from Poland, we saw him already. He was working in Danzig and in Warsaw, and he did exactly this kind of reconstruction. What is written in the paper is completely wrong. But he also signed the document. He was just working and maybe was on a vacation in Italy. However, in any way his name is under the document. This is a person from Tunisia. I didn't find so much. He joined a lot of conferences, and in Tunisia he is one of the pioneers of archaeology. And the others here, I found some books, no pictures, mostly art historians. And here these people, I have no further information of them. So that at last, this was an example of people's power who come together, fix a paper, and this paper can be worldwide important. And this encouraged us to do equal. The next step, the picture is here already, is changing of people's mind. After the Second World War, a lot of things were damaged. The needs for the historical cities were there, but on the other hand, also the idea for the new way of life was getting very strong. They like to have this technology, and they believe that the new technology can solve their problems worldwide. They had this huge hope that with technique we can change to a better world. And they are not completely wrong. If you think about it, at that time they were living around about 4 billion people on the earth. Technology made it possible that nowadays are nearly 8 billion people on this world. This is success of technology in agriculture and so on. Otherwise it would not be possible to live with so many people in the world. So their idea was not completely wrong. I don't like to damage their idea that technology, science, research can bring us up. It can bring us up. But we have to understand this has limitations. This always touches borderlines. And the first thing not directly has to do with monumental heritage, but it has to do with this. Because beginning of a new thinking process was that this beautiful model, this beautiful idea of growing in better circumstances by technology was suddenly interrupted. It was interrupted by the first accident in an atomic factory. This was in Sellafield, before it was called Windscale, 1957. The atomic factory exploded, and the X-ray and the radioactivity waves were going over the area, spread over the area. And the result was that after some years they found out a lot of children have blood cancer. People have very strange changings. Embryos have damaged bodies. And they found out by statistic that this is in this area very often. And then they understand that the accident hurts people's genetic material. They understand that the dream to to have this superpower has also a limitation. There is not, without any interruption, good technique on the world. The technology revolution has borderlines, has dangers. And this was a beginning where people run against such topics. And they were especially politically running for the nature, to bring the right of the nature against technology. This was starting in England. And because of this development, it was occupied from other countries. In Germany we have the Green Party, which at last has the roots from this development. It was willing to protect nature. And nature and monuments are very close. Because at the same moment, they understand that their cities changed rapidly. They were not so happy for their cities anymore. To drive with a car everywhere is lovely, but you cannot walk at last when you have such motorways. Then the pedestrian has no right anymore. And they remember it was so nice, go from shop to shop. And now they have to jump in a car, go from the center, and all the area around of it is damaged. In Germany we have one very ugly example in the city of Ulm. Ulm has a very beautiful church. It's one cathedral which was built with the highest tower, church tower of the world. It's 160 meters, so it's the highest church tower of the world, even an important church. And this medieval city was cutted by this motorway. See it here. They damage the city. They bring two parts, left and right of the motorway. And people don't like that. They didn't like this kind of urban design. And in the result of this kind of urban design, they begin more and more to ask, the old cities' quality had very good results for the life quality. And they were asking for these old cities. And when they found cities which were rotten already because no one took care, everyone dreamed to have something different, they begin to take care. What was not damaged, they begin to take important. And this development is starting with the accident in Sellafield in England, and moved over the nature, moved to the city, that there was a common thinking growing in the 60s that they need to protect the old stuff, the nature. There's a movement a little bit against the technology, but at last it's also a development for the good feeling in the cities, in the nature. And this developed the next steps. Now we are in the coffee break. The students know we spent a long time in Europe, and this fits a little bit the Europe thinking. Till the First or Second World War, they thought they were the center of the world. But they lost this center even before the First World War already, because the new superpower which was raising were the United States. In the United States they had the chance to bring the material, which was everywhere in the country, together, and by this they were growing. And the point is, to look for the United States is important, because the world always has the idea for a superpower. To explain that in examples, in the medieval time, the Catholic Church was the center. The language, the international language, was of course Latin. After the 30 Years' War, French take the power. And this language which was spoken worldwide, was mostly French. Even Frederick the Great, German king, speak French at home. The next was that the British give the size, and it was moving to English. And by this maybe people didn't understand that the British were at last overtaken by the United States. And so still English is the most important language worldwide. The United States are the country which give the fashion. I always ask my students, just look on your trousers, and then half of them has a jeans. And maybe you also just wear a jeans. Why? This is a cowboy trousers. The cowboy trousers is simply taken from the United States. I even can imagine that Bin Laden sometimes wear a jeans. That does not mean you 100% follow a country's idea, but a First Nation give you the culture background. And because the cultural background is very often copied from these countries, we need specially look for the United States. Yeah, I explained that. The United States bring the territory together. They bring the possibilities to do good trade by building the railroads. The railroads were connecting the countries, the ocean. The railroads bring all the goods together. And when you bring the goods together, you can start the process of industrialization in a very good way. And the United States were lucky. They had all the important goods in their country. And even so much that they could rapidly go to export them. The key for this success was at last the railroad system. When we look now for the monuments, the elder monuments in America, they are mostly simple. We have some elder monuments from the Indians, not so much. And the first architecture is very pure. What I show you here is the house where Abraham Lincoln grew up. Nowadays, a building like a temple is built around of it. And inside is the hut where the American president Abraham Lincoln grew up. His father was a drunk. He beat the boy nearly to death. And maybe he learned exactly in this house what it means to be like a slave under someone. Maybe he learned in his childhood in this building what it means to be without any power against someone who has completely control over you. In any way, this is a building which is nowadays protected. There were thousands of them. They're all gone. Only this house they take care, like a national secret, sacred place. The other building here is a building also has to do with Abraham Lincoln. This is a house, we see that here, Appomattox Court House, where 1865 the Civil War ends. That means General Lee had to sign in front of General Grant that they lost the war. And this was done in this building. Here we see an older photograph. Nowadays it's rebuilt. We see it like that. But when you look more detailed, look for the windows, look for the surrounding, at last they take the place to remember it. The same project is done here with the house of Jefferson. Found the basement. This was an elder picture of it, and they rebuilt it. Now they have this kind of monument. The real monuments in America are beginning in the 20s. Frank Lloyd Wright's buildings are under monumental protection today, of course. So the development in America was slowly, not so quickly as in Europe. Because in Europe the monument simply and the understanding of that and being linked with this culture was elder. But there's one case in America what really changed thinking. And this is important. This was the story around the Pennsylvania station in New York. It's a huge railroad station which was here built in New York 1910. This has a special topic. The point is that Manhattan is a very small island, and it was not possible to bring the railroad to Manhattan. Because when you do that, you need a bridge which is so high that you need a very long curve to bring the railroad down again. And because of that, it was impossible to build a railroad station in Manhattan. Then, engineers found out a way to make a tunnel. And so they bring this railroad under the Hudson River in this location. So the railroad system was in the earth, very deep, and over it they built the building. And this was a key building why New York could be developed so rapidly. Before it was Chicago, but the way from Chicago is over these 4 huge lakes when you like to bring boats to Europe. New York is in a key position. And that was the reason that New York suddenly was growing, getting more important, because they could bring the railroad system there. So this is a central building for the city of New York. In the construction, we can see it here, what for an important place it took, and they made this architecture very important. They bring a mixture of Roman architecture, color themes, and modern architecture over the earth. Then you had to go down over staircases and came to the basement. Here we see a Zeppelin flying over that. But in the 60s, they had this idea to build the Madison Square Garden. That is where till today we can see the boxing fights. That means they really built it. And they like to demolish this Pennsylvania station. And this was the first time that people didn't agree. We see here protesters marching, Save Our Heritage. 1963. We remember Sellafield was 6 years earlier. The movement, Protect Monuments, reached the United States. The people who do protest here were very famous. Jane Jacobs, she wrote a very important book. Everyone, I suggest, should read it. The Death and Life of the Great American Cities. She was a very critical analyst. And the famous architect Philip Johnson, one of these persons who get more than 100 years. He also involved himself fighting for this Pennsylvania station. You can see them together. Here is Johnson and here is Jacobs. He at the same moment was an architect standing for the modern architecture, not for the historical architecture, but he was fighting for that. And this was something that would really persuade people worldwide, take care of the monuments. When such a guy who is famous for the open heart, for modernism, takes care of something, elder, this changed people's mind. So this movement from America now is now doing interactive with the European movements, what we saw already. And by this interactivity, the idea to protect monuments get more worldwide accepted, to find ways to do that. Now you earn the next coffee break. Now we will see how the revolution continued. Revolution for monuments. Even in a country which had a revolution, in China, people were fighting for monuments. Here we see Lin Kuai-yin, who was taking care of this old temple and other monuments, fighting for the old city of Beijing, for the Puchongs, to protect them. His wife, also very famous, she did the logo of the People's Republic. But we can see that also in countries which have a completely different political system, which are at that moment enemy country of the United States, even such countries copy the idea, take the idea which was growing worldwide, and experts pick it up and develop it. Of course, he had a Chinese way to understand this, not the way as the United States did it. But in reality, we can see that such movements are worldwide. The world is interacting and exchanging ideas. In Germany, we have the development at last taken from the UNESCO, 1972, and Germany began 1976 to ratify that. The UNESCO papers are meanwhile ratified by most of the countries. We can see that here in a list. Very different time. Here's one from 2002, Barbados, and some do a ratification, accept that. Some even have acceptation. Some have only notification. So we find very different way how to handle that. The world is colorful, and by this we have very different ways to accept that. Here we see another part of this never-ending list. But most of the countries accept this UNESCO papers. Here I like to explain the World Monument Heritage. World Monument Heritage is something what is a process which is accepted by the boards of the UNESCO. This is something what is organized by experts who organize experts. It's not something what is voted. By this, it's a little bit different system. What we see here is a map from 2012. It's today changed already. But it is interesting to analyze that. When we look on this map, we can see where the center of the culture should be after the World Monument Heritage List. We would suspect it's Europe. Spain, France, Italy, Germany. They have most World Monument Heritage 2012. Can that be? In reality, if we look for the high cultures, we had some in Middle America, very less monuments in blue group. We had some from the Inca, also blue. We had a very important culture in Egypt, in Anatolia, in the two-river area, Euphrates, Tigris, in Persia, in India, in China. These were the hot spots of human culture. But we can see that the numbers of world monuments are very less. Were they destroyed? No. They were simply not mentioned. That means that countries like Congo, they also have cultural heritage, but they don't have the power, the manpower, to put someone on the table and bring all the documents together to apply in the UNESCO. So this is at last the result of an application process. And countries which have a well-working administration, they have a better chance to apply for the monuments. It's just a question who applies. The UNESCO understands that nowadays and does corrections. So countries which have no monument in the moment and like to have it, they are supported. And it's surely right. Because at last, this is not the cultural development of the earth. This is the result of rich and poor countries. And monuments should not obey to this law. The same is with the natural monuments. You see here's a little bit different. Natural monuments is something what is often linked together. In the United States we have this case, natural and architecture monuments are even in one group and the same law. They are handled in the same law. So that's in a lot of countries equal, similar, so we have to look for both aspects. Now we come to some cases which were hardly discussed, which were very different. The first one, maybe I give this, was Dresden. Dresden got the rank to be World Monument Heritage, old city. And just 2 or 3 years later, they like to build a bridge over the Elbe River, very close to this monument. The UNESCO said, don't do that. If you do it, you damage the urban situation of the old Baroque city. The quality, why we give you the rank, is damaged. The mayor in Dresden found a very simple solution. He did a voting, people's voting. Do you need a bridge or do you need to be a World Monument Heritage? And the people of Dresden decided, no, I like to visit my mama on the other side of Elbe River. This is important. And of course they decide for the bridge. So they built their beautiful bridge and the UNESCO put the city out of it. Germany has, we remember, too much World Monument Heritage in the size of the world. So by this maybe they even enjoyed it, but Dresden lost it. Another example is Cologne. In Cologne, 2006, Murphy and Young like to build a skyscraper in the axis of the Cologne Cathedral. The skyscraper would completely interrupt the view of Cologne Cathedral from this view. The same game, UNESCO said, if you build it, you are out of our list. Cologne mayor decided, we build it, so what? But 2008, we remember, there was a crisis, the stock market broke, and the investor group, who like to build this beautiful skyscraper from Murphy and Young, it's even an important American design company, were not willing to build the building anymore. By this, Cologne Cathedral is still a monument on the rank of a World Monument Heritage. But do they really need it? Cologne Cathedral would be famous without this rank of a World Monument Heritage. In Germany it's on the 2nd rank. Millions of tourists go there every year. I don't think that less tourists will go to Cologne if they would have lost this name. Also, Dresden doesn't suffer less tourists because they lost it. So the rank is maybe for famous places not that important. Maybe it's more important for areas where tourism needs to be developed, because some people are hunting world monuments on their visit. Make a list, ding, 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 I visit this, I visit that. Maybe for them it's important, but reality it's not that important for tourism. For such places. On the other hand, when you go to Cologne nowadays, you see the plate of the city, and then very soon another plate, City of the World Monument Heritage of Cologne Cathedral. They are still proud for it. Another case, this gets more complicated, is the Buddhism figure which was damaged in Bamiyan in Afghanistan. This beautiful figure was standing there for more than 1,000 years. It's a figure from monks who went to India and Japan and bring their religious idea. And on the way they also moved over Afghanistan and of course built their Buddhism monuments there. And then these monks continued, reached China and reached at last Japan, and bring their philosophy idea to this countries. In the Medieval time we have the Islamic conquest of Afghanistan, and it became an Islamic country. The Islamic rulers had no problem with this world monument heritage. In the communistic time, they made it even applied and made a world monument heritage from this impressive figure. Then the government of the Taliban reached power. And the Taliban government, which was a very strict government for the Islamic ideas, thought that this figure is forbidden in their religion. Because the Quran don't like this God's figures standing somewhere. And they take this Quran very word by word. And so they damage this figure, let it explode. We see here the explosion. Poof, figure is away. So now it looks like that. It's an empty hole, the figure is bound away. The interesting question is now, was the government right? Is it correct? Were they allowed to bomb this figure away? When we think about this question, we have to remember who makes law. Law can only be made in countries. We remember that. When now a country has a government which is settled up by Taliban members, and this government decides this kind of monument is something we don't need anymore. It is a right to decide it. Because what a monument is or not is always decided in the country by the people. And if it's a dictatorship, it's still a decision of the country. If democracy or dictatorship doesn't matter. A country founds a kind of government, however they find it, and this government gives law. And the law is that what is for this country what has to be done, if you agree or not. But this is the way decisions are done. And if a decision is done, we don't need this monument. We like to have another one, beautiful Islamic mosque, for example. It's their decision. It was their right to do it. That's something we, on the first rank, have to understand. But now we have to think more. Maybe it's too easy. You remember the story that monks from India moved over this area, moved over Afghanistan to reach at last Japan. And this figure has to do with the culture of India, with the culture of Afghanistan, with the culture of China, and with the culture of Japan. So it is a monument which does not only belong to Afghanistan, it belongs also to the neighbor countries, and not only to the neighbor countries, even to faraway Japan. This is a very good example which shows that the responsibility for monuments is in the hand of a country which gives law. But the moral, what is a monument, is on a world's level. And this was surely a world's monument, because this belongs to the things mankind could do. And the government who has to protect this for mankind, in this case, failed. This is what the UNESCO also saw, and nowadays they do something very strange. They like to rebuild it. Personally, I don't know if this kind of rebuilding is correct. This maybe is even Charter of Venice, which we learned the wrong way. But maybe it's also an example how colorful the decisions are done worldwide. You earned the next coffee break. Now we come to the last chapter. We look for merry old Germany. And Germany is a country which always liked to be a little bit more. This seems to be German manner. The law in Germany, when we accepted to have monuments, was done around about 1975. This was an important year for monuments. We can see stamps where monuments are shown. This was the point where the movement, what we had before, was going over the institutions and reached the governments. And by this they begin to organize how to take care of the monuments. There was a development worldwide, and Germany took it up very early. But Germany is a country which was reunited 1871 by an emperor. If we remember that, Germans win the war against France, and then this Prussian king liked to bring the other kings and dukes, which were completely separate, together. He only had one chance to explain to them there is something what is national interest. For example, military. It's not possible that Bavaria is attacking a country, Prussia is not attacking, and Anhalt-Dessau, small country, is attacking the next one. So military need to be organized by one power. Economic must also be organized by one power. It cannot be everyone has his own coin as before. They need a common currency and so on. So there are a lot of interests which have to be done together, which cannot be done country by country. But the small countries like to have as much rights as possible in their hand. And one point is, for example, the police. In Germany, all the police officers have the logo of their country on their suit. They don't have the logo of the Federal Republic of Germany. They belong to a country. Because the kings and dukes didn't like to give the police to the emperor. They don't trust him so much. And, of course, they didn't give the school system and the culture to the central government. They thought they have the decision what children learn in their country, which kind of art is supported. That was in their hands, and they didn't give it away. And because of that, the countries keep this power. And after all the changings in history, it's still like that. The federal countries and other countries called provinces, they have the right to give law. And so in Germany, all these separate countries have different law. And it is in every country a little bit different. It's not equal. This is something that is hardly to understand for people from outside. Beginning from 1972 to 1980, all the Western countries prepare their own monumental protection law. The DDR, in the process, even on the other side, to the communistic countries belonging, did the same 1975. They also accepted. They didn't have the economical power to protect so much, but they take the law and they're willing to take care of special buildings. Especially Dresden seems a permanent concept. They rebuild, rebuild, and rebuild. The situation in Germany is now that we have 1 million monuments. That's what I explained was Germany always needed very intensive. What Germans need is always more than others. 1 million monuments. We have monuments on well-known buildings like the Neuschwanstein Castle, but also a shepherd's house or this industry facility. province, Saxony-Anhalt, this is not correct, they have 32,000 monuments in the moment. It is a lot, but on the other hand it shows how rich the country is and what for a huge history standing behind of it. This willing to protect it was very long, permanently continuing. It was done so perfect that people suddenly feel it's too much, it's too narrow. And then we have people like this guy who were analyzing it, who said, maybe, his name is Dieter Hoffmann Axel, maybe we protect the property of the upper class, the high society. Maybe we take public money to protect their buildings. Is this necessary? And people begin to think about this question in a different way. But this was a small interruption, because the common agreement that monuments are not only for special people, that the buildings, the church, even it belongs to the church group, it's not only for this group, it's part of the society and belongs to the society. This idea was strong. Because in reality, by all the critics, we can find out that the acceptance that the people like this monument is never broken. Of course, some people feel too narrow when such a lady is sitting there and take your papers and decide the color of your door. No one liked that. Because every law in monumental protection is a law which goes in individual rights. It goes in your property. You have a monument, and because of that, you are not allowed to paint your door red, like your neighbor. You have to listen to someone from the administration who tell you that your color of this door is green. And even more, if you don't take care of this important door, you're even sued and someone give you a bill. This is something what is hardly to accept for a lot of people. And so there are conflicts with monumental preservation. This is the normal way. But you have to negotiate that. You have to find compromises. That's the hard work people do in monumental preservation. And there are a lot of things where you have to do compromise. Here we see the question how to save energy. We need solar technique to make up the missing coal, to make up atomic power. We need this natural energy. But can we suffer this on a roof? Or do we find compromises where we bring this together? So this is the work the people in monumental preservation have to do on all sides. If you are the architect who has to find the solution, if you are in the administration who has to decide that, or if you are the representative of the house owner, you are involved in these processes. But that's a very interesting question, and that makes it last another boring topic. There are organizations in Germany also who take care in a bigger size, who collect money from the society and who help sometimes. This is here in Germany called Deutsche Stiftung Denkmalschutz. But this is not like the National Trust in Britain, what we learned. They at last completely depend on the money private people give to them. But they are really important because they give such an impulse with a lot of monuments which are in danger. And this is something what in this way is very helpful. The way how Germany supports monuments is very seldom by direct money. This is only done for the very famous and important monuments. And if there are special campaigns, for example, a Luther memorial, then the government raise money and put money in to make this memorial important. Or the 100 years Bauhaus, and they renew the buildings. These are campaigns where you can raise public money. But private owners very seldom get any coin from the monumental protection. They get the law. You have to take the expensive tiles on the roof, not the cheap one. They have to suffer that. But Germany found a brilliant way that you can make up taxes by monuments. When you do a normal building campaign, you can bring this building campaign, if it's for economical reasons, 50 years against the taxes. That means you spend €100 and every year you can bring €2 away against taxes for the next 50 years. If you have a monument, you can do that divided with 12. That means it's around about 8 times, €8 a year, what you can bring against taxes. And this makes it attractive for investors to put their money in a monument. That's the way how monuments are mostly supported in Germany. There are campaigns where people like to protect buildings. We see here some of them. It even can change governments. In Baden-Württemberg, they want to change a railway station from Bonn-Garz, 1920 something. And the people race against that, changed their government. Now they have a Green Party leader, Kretschmann, who is in Württemberg. And this really can change politics if monuments are under attack. Point is Kretschmann also couldn't save it. The railway is changed. But in any way, it shows the political power, if you go against monuments, can even cost politically your career. But there are also sometimes demonstrations where people like to damage monuments. This is the other point. So we have at last both. There is nevertheless a common agreement in Germany for monuments. Sometimes it's very complicated. How to handle this figure of Karl Marx, Marx and Engels nowadays. I think we have to protect them because they are important monuments for the history of Germany. But some politicians think they have to be gone, they have to be taken away. Here's very funny, they say, wir sind unschuldig, we are without guilty, because they are not responsible for the DDR and for the circumstances the DDR went down. That's surely right. So it is also in Germany a question of decisions. Monuments need decisions. How complex they are, we learned. We learned in this lecture a lot of. When we go from the history, beginning from the Roman Empire, see how the thinking to protect monuments were growing, we can see that there is a way how things were developing. We see in the beginning people who like to protect their culture when it's beginning to get lost. It's a very national and on the group focused idea. We saw a king who conquered an area who liked to have equality. This was not so national anymore. This was a little bit brighter already. And then we see the movement that people begin to understand monuments belong not only to a country, they are from international interest. We as mankind are responsible for monuments. And then they found a way on the technical way how to see that, how to protect as much old material, bring it to the next generation, and what for concepts can be done. So we can see a permanent development on making monument preservation better, international, and stronger. I hope that this lecture helps you a little bit to understand the way how we treat monuments today, but especially also maybe including that it gives the hope that continuing thinking, working, brings step by step better results. Thank you very much. Enjoy your last coffee break.